I'm Bryan Perez, joined by Crissy, Froyd, and Ryan Fowler from the Draft Network here in Mobile, Alabama for the 2022 Senior Bowl, where in the weeks leading up to the event kicking off, the talk was all about the quarterbacks. 5 of the top 6 prospects in this year's class are participating in the event, and Tuesday we got our first chance to take a look at all of them in practice. So Crissy, Ryan, your first impressions, your first takeaways from the American and National practice today.
Yeah, I mean, look, day one, I'm glad we're here. First off, glad to be back and see these guys live. We've watched so much film over these last couple months, looking at our scouting reports of all these types of different guys and different skill sets. And for me, really focusing in on Desmond Ridder and Malik Willis. Ridder from Cincinnati, Willis from Liberty. Left a lot to be desired for each guy. And, just moving forward into day 2 and to day 3, I would like to see a lot more that I think those guys left on the table today in day 1.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of guys like Desmond Ridder that we expected to do better. Malik Willis, I think he grew in some aspects in terms of what Malik Willis needs to improve on. His throws had a lot more touch on them, but in terms of the race, I thought he was QB 4 or 5. For me, I feel like I learned basically what I had already been saying, that Carson Strong is the best quarterback here. It's really close between him and Kenny Pickett, but I think when it comes down to being the most mistake-free quarterback on day 1 and having an it factor, he has it. I counted only 2 bad throws from him, one into coverage that could have been an interception, and then in routes on air, he had one that was pretty low, but his receivers still reeled it in. I think all the deep balls down the sideline were good. He had one deep ball down the sideline into the end zone that was a touchdown, and then another one that could have been a touchdown, but Romeo Doubs seemed to lose the ball on that play.
So when you guys talk about the quarterbacks who struggled a little bit, I mean, it's kind of to be expected the first day of an all-star practice event,
Yes.
The first day of practices at an all-star event. These quarterbacks developing timing with receivers who they haven't really thrown with, except for maybe Desmond Ridder, right? He had Alec Pierce, his top receiver in college. He was throwing to him on his side of the ball, and Carson Strong had the benefit of throwing to Romeo Doubs. But what do you want to see, Ryan, from these guys over the next couple of days? You talked about, Desmond Ridder, maybe Malik Willis getting off to a slow start. How important is it for them to show progression on day 2 and then eventually on day 3?
I think for both of them, it's just we came into this process for them not to hurt their stock. And when you're here and everyone is in a neutral environment, where they are here in Mobile, they're working with different receivers. Sure, it's nice to have Alec Pierce. Sure, it's nice to have Romeo Doubs. But when you're working with different guys, Christian Watson, Calvin Austin, Velus Jones, the names go on and on and on. Just don't try to play hero ball. Yeah, sure, we saw Carson Strong stretch the field a little bit. We saw Kenny Pickett, work the intermediate areas of the offense. What he did all year long at Pittsburgh to an elite clip. That's why he was a Heisman semifinalist this year. But I would like to see Desmond Ridder and Malik Willis just kind of taper it back a little bit. We saw Malik really try to force every ball into tight windows. Not every pass needs to be 100 miles an hour. Desmond Ridder looked a little jittery. His first 2 snaps in team portion of practices today were on the ground. That's the easiest way to find yourself on the bench at the NFL level. Just taper it back a bit. Calm down. You've been in the environment before. Desmond Ridder led Cincinnati to the CFP this year. He's been in this environment before. It's nothing new. Sure, the NFL is a whole new ball game, but just taper it back a little bit.
Yeah, I think in terms of quarterbacks who want to see do more, Bailey Zappi is a quarterback I was really high on. Yeah. Unfortunately, didn't have that great of a day in practice, and there's a concept that I talked about with a receivers coach one time that's called running hot, and it's whenever a receiver gets frustrated and they kind of get worse as time goes on. And what I saw from Bailey Zappi today was there was no real sporadicness. He was either doing really well consistently or really badly consistently. So I thought maybe he was getting down on himself. I think that under center, he struggled a little bit, but that's the thing. He plays in the air raid offense. In the air raid offense, we don't often put our quarterbacks under center. So I think it's a little bit of an adjustment for him. He did show some good things, but he also had some really inaccurate throws, some to be desired with arm strength. The ball looked a little bit heavy at times. Definitely didn't have the zip on it that guys like Carson Strong did, that Kenny Pickett did at times as well.
So after the first day of practice, after watching all the tape and looking at all these guys in this year's draft, I think it's natural that draft analysts, draft fans are going to compare this year's class to last year's almost historic group of guys that maybe some, Trevor Lawrence was obviously the guy, the generational prospect, which is a really dangerous thing to coin a player as.
Very dangerous, Bryan.
But we had so many guys that were jockeying for position in the top 5. So when you see a group like this year's, 5 of the top 6 guys are basically here in Mobile. it feels a little underwhelming, but is that an accurate or fair assessment to make? Or do you guys think a player like Kenny Pickett or Carson Strong can evolve into that first round, maybe top 15 pick, and eventually a really good NFL starter?
Go ahead, Crissy, if you like.
Yeah, I think that it comes down to Pickett or Strong. I think both of them could be a top 15 pick. I think with Pickett, we've seen kind of a meteoric rise, something like Joe Burrow. And as much as every player is different, there's a lot of similarities between these guys. It's the same rise, it's the same type of mobility. I've also spent time talking to both of them throughout the season, well, Joe Burrow respectively whenever I was at LSU with him. And they have kind of the same mindset, same demeanor. And when we look at what Pickett did today, he managed well, didn't do anything really to raise his stock, didn't do anything to lower it, but he came in with a really strong foundation, showed a lot of really good things on tape, and I think that he is more than a game manager. I mean, we've seen him have some really good comeback wins, some really good deep balls, and I think that he brings a lot to an NFL team. I just think that as far as it factor goes, that Strong might be the better quarterback by a hair.
Yeah, I mean, looking back to last year, the talk was Lawrence, Lance, Wilson. I mean, these, like you said, these generational talents. And now,
Wilson.
right, and we're sitting here now, and Mac Jones was QB1 of the class, and Davis Mills was QB2. And I know leading into the process, Davis Mills, big kid out of Stanford, big arm, understands the game, good processor. So looking at this year's class where people aren't that high on this group, and sure, it's very varying skill sets. You compare Carson Strong, you look at Malik Willis, it's apples to oranges. As from a skill set, they offer way different things. But looking at last year, when you're expecting guys to come in and bring the teams to the playoffs and win games, like, is Mac Jones one guy, right? And sure, it's situations. Mac Jones fell into the perfect situation in New England under Bill Belichick. But you look at this year, and we're kind of under these guys, just like, sure, it's a mediocre QB class. They have everything to gain.
One of the things that sometimes gets overlooked at an event like this is actually what doesn't happen on the field.
Right.
The interviews behind the scenes with teams, getting to learn these players, learn how they think, learn about their personalities. And that's stuff that we'll hear about over the next couple of days by the time the Senior Bowl week comes to a close. Who impressed the most off the field? And sometimes that has the biggest impact on positional rankings, more so than any wow throw we see on the field over the next couple of days. Speaking of the next couple of days, any final takeaways, anything you guys are looking to see before we say goodbye?
Well, I think, like you said, it is just day one. There's a lot that can change, but I'm looking forward to how Ritter, Willis, and Zappe can raise their stock after kind of having an off day today.
Yeah, I wanted to speak on Bryan with from a leadership standpoint and killing interviews for these quarterbacks, because it matters. And sure, it's much more than just reading X's and O's on a whiteboard. It's if you're a 21, 22-year-old kid coming into an NFL locker room with grown men, and that matters. And how these guys react to certain questions in the interview room, whether it's here in Mobile or at the Combine, pro days, separate interviews, it matters tremendously, as much as the film matters and play matters and how the ball pops off their arms or whatever you see on film. Getting these guys in rooms and potential faces of their franchise and leading a locker room full of grown men matters.
We'll be back soon with a complete breakdown of all the action from day 2 with the quarterbacks. Follow the Draft Network for more Senior Bowl coverage all week long.